Must be strange for you, watching my dream come to life when yours never quite took off. But some of us are meant to create, and some are meant to assist. The words hung in the air of the packed art gallery, sharp and sterile. Behind Xavier, the massive, pulsing light installation, our installation bathed his face in a cool blue glow. The flash of a photographer's camera went off, a silent pop of white light freezing his smug, pitying smile into a permanent image in my mind. It's not strange at all, Xavier. I met him at a digital arts workshop 5 years ago. He had the charisma, the network, and a compelling way of describing ideas he hadn't yet had. I had the skill, the work ethic, and a Wacom tablet that was practically an extension of my hand. We clicked over a shared love for generative art. I remember one night, fueled by cheap ramen and cheaper coffee in my tiny apartment, we sketched out the first concept for Ethel, our interactive light sculpture. His energy was infectious. That was the good memory. The first red flag came a month later during a pitch to a small investor. He presented my initial algorithm concept as his own spontaneous idea. When I looked at him, he just gave me a subtle wink as if we were partners in a charming little con. I told myself it was for the good of the project. He was the showman, I was the architect. It was a role I foolishly accepted. The next 2 years were a blur of creation. Project Ethel became my entire world. I spent countless nights coding, designing, and fabricating, living off savings while he schmoozed. We used Slack to communicate, and the project files lived on a shared server. I remember the thrill when we secured our first major grant. He celebrated by buying a vintage Porsche while I upgraded my computer's RAM. He was always the one giving interviews, his face appearing in art blogs and tech magazines. I was the silent partner, the technical lead he'd vaguely reference. The imbalance grew slowly. Borrow $5,000 from the project account for a networking trip to Miami. He'd use my hardware for his personal side gigs. Each time I rationalized it. We needed the exposure. We needed the connections. The discovery was an accident, a digital slip-up. An email, sent to me by mistake, intended for his new business partner. It was a single, devastating thread. In it, Xavier detailed his plan to dissolve our informal partnership and launch Ethel as his solo debut. He mentioned a separate shell company he'd funneled over $100,000 of our grant money into. He called me his workhorse, easily managed and soon to be sidelined with a token payout. The world tilted. I sat in my silent apartment for an hour, the glow of the screen illuminating the truth. Then I began to work. For 3 months, I became a forensic accountant of our own lives. I downloaded every file from the server, archiving years of Slack conversations, where I detailed my work, and he offered vague encouragement. I pulled bank statements, cross-referencing project expenditures with withdrawals that matched his lavish Instagram posts. I even hired a freelance coder we'd used briefly, paying him to sign a sworn affidavit confirming I was the sole author of Ethel's core algorithm. Week before he sent the email officially severing our ties, Xavier took me to a Michelin-starred restaurant. He slid a check for $10,000 across the table. He said it was a gesture of goodwill, a thank you for all my help, but it was time for him to take the project to the next level, a level I wouldn't understand. He said I just didn't have the vision. I took the check and deposited it the next day. He thought that was the end of it. It was only the beginning. The breaking point was the invitation. A thick, embossed cardstock announcing the world premiere of Xavier Vance Presents, Ethel. My name was nowhere. Not as a collaborator, not as a technician, not even in the fine print thank yous. Premiere was at the prestigious Soma Digital Gallery. I saw the guest list online. Ms. Vance, the gallery owner, Zara Khan, a powerful tech journalist, and dozens of investors and artists he'd schmoozed using my work and our money. I stood in my apartment holding the invitation, the weight of 2 years of deceit pressing down on me. It was there in the quiet hum of my computer that the plan crystallized. He hadn't just stolen my work, he'd tried to erase me. He had overlooked one tiny, crucial detail. Every original Adobe and Autodesk file on that server contained metadata. A digital fingerprint. My digital fingerprint, with creation dates stretching back 5 years. My first call was to an intellectual property attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Sterling. Her retainer was $15,000, almost everything I had left. I walked her through the evidence, laying it out on her polished mahogany table. The process was methodical, almost surgical. We filed a lawsuit for fraud, intellectual property theft, and breach of partnership, but we kept it sealed. The trap had to be perfect. The evidence was irrefutable. 1482 timestamp server commits under my username. The misdirected email outlining the fraud. 47 documented fund transfers to his shell corporation, totaling $142,500. The sworn affidavit from the coder. Most ironic piece of evidence was the clincher. The core algorithm for Ethel's light patterns was a direct evolution of my final thesis project from university, which was publicly archived and dated. He had stolen my past along with my present. My one close call came 2 days before the premiere. He called, asking if I still had the source files for an early prototype. Just for my archives, he said, his voice slick with false casualness. I felt a spike of panic, thinking he was onto me. I lied and told him the drive had been corrupted months ago. He bought it. The decoy was the premiere itself. Ms. Sterling advised me it was the perfect stage. Let him build his monument as high as possible before we kick out the foundation. The gallery was buzzing. Ethel was magnificent, a symphony of light and code that filled the cavernous white space. My work. I let Xavier finish his speech to the adoring crowd, let him soak in the applause. Then, as he was taking questions, I stepped forward. I just have one question about the creative process, Xavier. He smiled, magnanimous. Of course, my friend. Anything. His bravado was a physical force. I held up a small tablet, connected wirelessly to the gallery's main projector, the one displaying his name in elegant script above the installation. The first image that flashed up replacing his name was a screen capture of the project's root directory. My username. The creation date, November 14, 2018. A murmur went through the crowd. His smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. And I projected the early concept sketches, my distinct handwriting scrawled in the margins. I followed it with the Slack logs, my paragraphs of technical solutions next to his one-word replies. Awesome, perfect, keep going. His face went from confused to pale. The killer proof was the final slide. On one side, the cover page of my university thesis, dated 2017. On the other, a scrolling display of Ethel's core algorithm. The two were nearly identical. Zahra Khan, the journalist, was already typing furiously into her phone. The silence in the gallery was absolute. Xavier stood there, mouth slightly open, the shifting blue light of our creation making him look like a ghost. He was speechless. I finally took the microphone he'd left on the podium. You were meant to assist. The 24 hours that followed were a controlled chaos of my own design. Ms. Sterling unsealed the lawsuit at 9 a.m. the next morning. By noon, Zahra Khan's exposé, titled Art of the Steal, was the top story on every major tech site. The gallery immediately suspended the exhibit and issued a public apology. The investors pulled out. The fallout was swift and total. The court case was a formality. Faced with the mountain of digital evidence, Xavier settled. The judgment was for the full $142,500 he had stolen, plus legal fees and damages. His Porsche was repossessed to cover the initial payment. The last I saw of him was a photo a friend sent me months later. I was working behind the tech support counter at an electronics store, wearing a bright red polo shirt with a name tag. The harsh fluorescent lights of the big box store a pathetic echo of the masterpiece he tried to claim. My life became quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not the silence of isolation, but the calm of peace. I used the settlement to lease a small studio in a different city, a space filled with my own tools and my own ideas. My new work is slower, more deliberate. It's entirely my own. Last week I was sketching out a new concept, and I wrote a line of code that felt familiar. I realized it was from the first night I'd worked on Ethel, a piece of myself I thought I'd lost to him. But it was still there. It was always there. Some of us are meant to create.